So this may come up in the discussion, it may not, but I have a very special relationship to this book, in that Debbie came to me, gosh, about 2 years ago with the idea for this book and asked if I would work with her as what we call a developmental editor and just be a sounding board and read drafts and all that good stuff. And I just want to say, I mean, it was, she invited me into what became this, a creative collaboration like no other I've ever been a part of. She brought such passion and intensity and vulnerability and bravery to this project. It was just really incredible. And, you know, other writers come in, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but with sort of conventional visions. They want to write the great American novel, or a childhood trauma memoir, or whatever it is. And from the start, Debbie's notion was much more nutso than that, and therefore much riskier. And I think she was often, I mean, you can say, but I think she always had belief, but also worry that it was just too nutso. And it was so inspiring to watch her hold on to the vision and hold on to it and hold on to it. And we even talked about what it would be like if we ever had a day like this. And here we are, and the book is in our hands. It's incredibly beautiful, inside and out. And so I'm so grateful to be here, part of launching it. I'm going to try to have a very, you know, wide-ranging, honest conversation, and then have some questions. So I'll be thinking of those. And I thought I would probably pose just a couple questions to you, and then I'll maybe invite you to read a bit. The first question is, I just thought there were two phrases in the book, that one of which was something of a touchstone from early on, and one of which really arrived late. And I wonder if you could just talk about the phrases as a way of sort of describing the world of this book. One was mirage of intimacy, which I believe is something a therapist once said to you. And then the other is the title, Escape Velocity, which is, I mean, I'm biased. I think it's just the perfect title, but it wasn't a phrase that you really were, I'm not sure, thinking about so much until late on in the process. So maybe you can just talk about those two phrases as how they sort of encompass some of the themes and ideas that are in the book.
Wow. Start me off with a toughie.
No, that's a softball.
We planned for Michael not to tell me what he was going to ask so that I could be spontaneous. Because I tend to rehearse too much when I know what's going to happen. So it's really an interesting question. So the mirage of intimacy was something, yes, that a therapist, when I was about 30, a therapist fed that back to me as a reflection of what he thought my life and my family was, where the subtitle of the book is how one 70-year-old pulled her way out of her too much, not enough family. Thank you, Michael. That was a Zoom meeting that led to the subtitle. And I think that captures a lot of this tension that Michael might be referring to with the mirage of intimacy, where it's there and it's not there. I mean, think about a mirage. It's sort of, you think it's real, but then you get closer and closer and it's like, maybe this isn't real. Maybe it's in my imagination, or something that exists on some other plane or something like that. So that was maybe a working title for a while. The real working title was 70 by 70 at 70. That was like a year and a half maybe of thinking of it as, because 70 micro memoirs, 70 words each, written for to mark my 70th birthday 2 years ago. So I wasn't ever even thinking about what another title could be, but Mirage of Intimacy just landed, and it felt like, oh, yeah, this is something 40 plus years ago that a therapist said that really does describe this tension. And Escape Velocity, I think I wrote the one called Gravity, which ends part 1, I think, around when I'm 29 or so, and trying to figure out how can I stay with my family but also separate from my family? Where do I belong? I need to get out, but I don't want to lose my family. So you'll hear from some of the excerpts I'll read a little bit of a taste of that piece of it. But in that micro called Gravity, I talk about wanting to escape the gravitational pull, or struggling with the gravitational pull of my family. So I think I just did, honestly, an AI inquiry, or whatever, what's it, like, question, asking perplexity.ai, and I just said, I'm writing this memoir, and it has to do with family and enmeshment, and I'm thinking that there's something to do with gravitational pull, and I'm thinking that there's something to do with getting, what that would mean to get out of a family and find my own separate self, which is kind of the theme in the book. And it generated this whole long list, and escape velocity was on that list. So it was not from my mind, but it just said, that's it. The second I saw it, I knew that was it. But then I looked it up, what it actually means in physics, and if there's any physicists in here, forgive me. But it has to do with the force with which one object, the speed actually with which one object needs to attain to escape gravity. So when a rocket lifts off a launch pad, it has to have a certain speed and a certain momentum to actually break the Earth's atmosphere. It's pretty simple, and it doesn't require any fancy stuff. It's big speed and momentum, and I sort of put in my own word of persistence for my journey. So the speed was, variable. I wouldn't say it was, as you'll see from the book, a lot of back and forth, but yeah, so it really worked. And then when we landed, thanks to Michael, on the subtitle, that put it together. So there's really nothing to do with physics. It's more to do with the force that is necessary to try to find oneself in an enmeshed family and not lose the family at the same time.
I thought that was so, when you sort of hit upon that, it was so helpful, because as you'll hear when Debbie reads, and if when you read the book, you'll see, we all have specific family experiences. Yours was a particularly intense one. Not everybody shares being in such an enmeshed and psychologically maybe difficult or problematic family, but I think we all do share the experience of wanting or needing some degree of, separation, individuation, self-actualization, and then the question is, do you leave the family behind? Can you keep it? Whatever. So those are the parts of the book that use the specificity for universality, which is, of course, such a great goal for any good book. And I realize I'm glad you talked about just the basic premise of 70 micro memoirs, 70 words each for being 70. I'm so close to this, I forget that not everybody necessarily knows, exactly what the premise was. And maybe that will lead into one other question, which is, when you came to me, I think you were sort of conceiving of it more as like a literary challenge, or almost a lark, like, oh, can I write these things in 70 words, and wouldn't that be fun? And I think you weren't thinking of it as a memoir, and I thought you may not even have given yourself permission to think that you, quote unquote, deserved to write a memoir, or that your life, whatever, you could dispute that, I don't know. So you may think this is another trick question. It's not. But I'm curious, before we talk more about what the book is, I think you had some very strong ideas about, as you then developed this, moved more towards this, very clear ideas about what you didn't want the book to be and what you resisted it becoming. And there were times when I would sometimes nudge you towards something, and you'd say, no, we can't do that, because I don't want to write a blank, or I don't want this to be like such and such. Can you talk about some of that, which is, of course, a way of actually talking about what you wanted it to be?
Yeah, it was a very, very complicated process in some ways, because I wouldn't say lark, but it was more like maybe an experiment. We talked very early on about, it being the idea of it being potentially a gimmick, and if the substance of the work didn't hold up, then it would be perceived as a gimmick, and it would just be 70 pieces of 70 words each that might have some inherent interest one by one. And I wasn't thinking at all of creating a through line. I didn't want to tell my story. I didn't want to talk about my family. I didn't want to dredge up my therapy experiences. I was kind of done with that, and so yeah, I didn't want to write a book about an enmeshed family.
Oops.
I just wanted to write like fun scenes from my life. Like I did this scene and that scene, and I mean, I've had a very interesting life. I've traveled. I'm interested in a bunch of different things, and so I thought, well, that could be interesting. And it really was Michael seeing the subtext of a lot of what I was writing, and maybe as I began to send him like massive lists of what about this, and then it was, I think he went away for about a month. So he had a trip about a month into this, and he just said, just write, just do a brain dump. And so I have like an 11-page single-space brain dump that pretty much goes through my entire life, and I put it in themes like music or social work or picture book writing or travel or I've been I have a list of jobs I could name and stuff, so that was one theme. But I didn't want to be heavy. I didn't want a trauma memoir, and because everybody writes a trauma memoir, and I also wanted it to reflect the 70 piece, to arrive at the 70-year-old self that I am now, and show or somehow be well, that came later too, but just to have it be something that has an ending or something, where it's not just random snippets arranged. There are a lot of collections of micro memoirs, not a lot, but a few, where the micro memoirs are not linked. And so I knew I was doing something that no one had done before. There are people who write micro memoirs that have recurrent themes, but that have been previously published, let's say, a bunch of different places. So that was an opportunity too. And your question was like, what I didn't want to write.
I think
so I kind of went digging down into the depths. I read my diaries again. The summer of 2024. I never wanted to look at that stuff again. In terms of like, what's my life story? It's like, oi, I know, and I don't want to go back there. And then, I didn't want to. And then in the uncovering of my diaries, I also came upon all kinds of letters to and from my parents, which I now have, which were in their papers after they died. And then I have, boxes of letters to and from my various therapists over the years. So it was like, do I really want to do this excavation? Because when you feel complete and having done a lot of therapy and feel like, I really don't want to be in therapy anymore. I don't know that I won't be ever again, but I just wanted to have that behind me. So it was a challenge, and he just said, there's something here, there's something else here, there's a woman, there's an arc, there's a trajectory, to use another science term, of my life that would be worth exploring. So really I owe it to you, Michael,
I mean, it was all there, and I think I used my sort of novelist brain. I was always thinking, well, there's got to be a narrative, there's got to be a trajectory, and it was this balance between whether you would say things or tell a story, sort of, if that makes sense. And I loved, you just talked about other micro memoir writers who don't link things. There was that moment where you're like, am I even allowed to, what if it's sequential? And I thought that was such a breakthrough in you. And there's one that it ends, a scene with your father, and it ends with, we never talk about it again. And then the title of the next micro is, after all, it was Daddy who, and then, and so it's this great, follow through.
Thank you.
So now that you've talked a little bit about what,
Can I do a minor little show and tell just to
yeah,
interrupt?
absolutely.
So I brought a little show and tell thing, which is one of the late stage charts that, I mean, this is nothing. This is a condensation of a lot of things. But I had like 4 columns. One was sort of general that didn't belong in a category. The other was early childhood family enmeshment. The second column was young adulthood looking for love. And then was later adulthood empowerment, mindfulness, individuation, loss, aging, all of that. So things started to, like, you just keep writing and writing, and Michael just said, keep writing, just don't forget about the 70, just write 100, write 90 words each, just write. And that was, extremely helpful. And so all of a sudden these themes started to appear. You can see I started color coding, and I think the color coding, remind me, was more like which is done and which is a rough draft or something. But
I learned a lot about charting.
I think I drove him crazy with my color coding and charting.
So not knowing what you didn't want it to be then sends you, I think, to figuring out what signals you want to send to a reader right from the get-go, and sort of set the tone and set the sort of the parameters. So I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that and your choices about that, or maybe if you want to just read from the beginning, or both. I thought that would be maybe just a good opportunity to share with the folks how it actually begins.
Yeah. Oh, yes. I'm going to read the first few pieces. It was such a process that developed over so long. I can't say that I landed on my 70 and then I was done, and then the whole thing evolved where I ended up working with a designer who was also an illustrator. So the whole aspect of the illustrations is an entirely different narrative arc that threads through the book. That was a lot of work as well. It was bit by bit by bit. I know people who are authors who are working, let's say, with essay collections and things. When you write something, then it's like, oh, now I remember there's this missing piece. I have to fill in that missing piece. But then that means I might have to dump another one, especially when I did have a restricted number. So I had to make difficult choices. I was looking the other day, there's probably 50 on a cutting room floor that I must have spent weeks and weeks and maybe even months refining the 70 words, trying to find exactly 70 words, gone, because they didn't fit what evolved from the bottom up, as we writers like to say, are these themes and these landing points. So it became many times very clear, okay, that just doesn't belong there anymore. But then there were things that I wanted to say that after I finished-ish, I noticed were missing. And that piece about my father, like, there's some things that are rather, kind of paint my father in a negative light. And so I really felt there was missing this whole aspect of my father's love and caring for me. So that one, and what is it? And after all, it was Daddy who, ... It's very much toward the end, was like a love letter to my dad in some ways. It was like, thanks, Dad. I mean, he died, 10 years ago now. But
I actually have a question I want to ask about that. But I think
okay.
I'm gonna save it. But do you want to share with us the
Yeah.
how it starts?
Yes. So